Okay, we're going to try and get some unwrapping done in this little tutorial. What I'm going to try and do is explain how to use the unwrap editor and unwrap this model. Now, this model is the beginning of the Joan arc tutorial that you've been doing in class. You can see that I've got an editable mesh in this case. I actually started in edit poly and converted it back over to edit mesh. A symmetry modifier and a mesh smooth. I'm first going to move the symmetry modifier to the top of the stack just so that it's a little bit easier to deal with down the road here. And then what I'm going to do is go back down to my editable mesh, and you can hit the show end result button if you are used to seeing the whole body, if that's what you'd like. The show end result button will allow you to see all the different modifiers combined but still work down here at the bottom. Make sure you're off all of sub-objects, and I'm going to apply an unwrap UVW modifier. I've moved it up here to a button on my computer at home, but you can also get a hold of that right here in the modifier stack. And you can see that it's now applied the unwrap UVW modifier, which that green line is a telltale sign that it's on there. Those are the seams. And we're ready to start unwrapping this. Now, a couple things about the model. I have not applied any UVW mapping to the model at all up to this point. So there is no mapping on this technically. I'm going to go ahead and just work that way. I'm used to working that way, but there are different ways that you can manage this type of stack structure. I'm also going to expand this screen out. And for future use, this is the side here that I'm working on. Remember, we have a symmetry modifier on this, so I'm really only working on half. Everything I apply to this half will be applied to this half as well. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the display of these seams, the green line. You can see that right now it's on thick. I'm going to change it to thin just because once I get working, those seams get a little annoying, and I don't like them when they're very thick. I'm also going to drop the select face down here. You're going to need to choose that. That will allow me to select faces, but the important thing is that I'm selecting faces in the editable mesh modifier, not within the mesh smooth. You're going to be picking faces out of here forever unless you have this type of stack structure. You don't want to be applying the UV or the unwrap UVW above the mesh smooth, or you're going to be digging polygons out of this model for a really long time. It's not going to be very fun. Okay, so select faces on. I'm going to go to edit, and I'm going to make sure that this is set up properly. The first thing I'm going to do is filter selected faces under display, otherwise you're really going to have trouble seeing the mesh. I'm also going to go down here under options. Need to shrink this down a little bit. And turn off tile bitmap. Right now that's not going to do anything, but down the line it will make it so our bitmap will show up only in this blue boxed area and not expand past that. It gets a little hard to see what's going on if it expands too far out from that. I'm going to check my notes here real quick and make sure we're on track. Okay, so I need to get mapping onto this model. The first thing I need to do is select the faces that I want to map. Now, I'm going to jump to the front view here just so I can see what I'm doing. On my model, I've got the front selected only. I don't have select through turned on this model, and I really don't want it to select through in this case because I like to do half of the model. So I'm going to just map that front area right now and get a little bit closer. There we go. So I'm also going to move the model over here in my viewport to the side. This way I can use the edit. The UVW unwrap editor will fit over here, and I can still see what I'm doing. So now I'm going to go and edit this. It's a pretty easy thing to do. In this case, I'm going to use, under mapping, I'm going to use normal mapping. Now, I could use planar map, which is over here. Now here's what planar map would do. If I just hit planar map, you can see that it will bring in, there's the map. It's just like regular planar mapping, and it'll bring it in over here. I can do it that way. In this case, I'm going to go to normal mapping, which is my option here within the editor, and I'm going to choose left, right, and hit OK. And I like this a little better just because it's going to be a little bit flatter. I'm going to rotate this around. I'm using the rotate tools up here in the editor, not these. These are grayed out. You can't use them. So I'm going to use them in the editor, and I'm just going to pull this leg up, and I'm going to leave it here. If you've looked at the template I've given you in class, I tend to put the leg pieces over here in the map. It's really just a personal place that I'm used to putting it. There's no right or wrong place. So now, this is actually mapped at this point. I'm going to rotate my model around now, and I'm going to get that back area. Actually, I think what I'll do is I'll just change this to back. So views and back. And now we're in the back view. I'm going to change this to smooth highlights, and I'm going to get a hold of that other leg, which is at the other side now. Remember, it's the side with those green seams is what I need to use. And there we go. Now I'm going to select the back part of the model's leg all the way down to her ankles. And remember, select through is not selected on mine, so it's only selected half. I'll turn it around here. You can see that it's only selected the back half. It's also a good reason to have these nice lines lined up. Makes things easy. And I'm going to do the same thing that I did before. So under mapping, I go to normal mapping, left, right in this case. It could be different depending on the models. And now I've got another, this is the back of the leg, and I'm going to move the back of the leg up here for the time being. Now, I'm going to go ahead and close this for a second. I'm going to go back to the front view. And the back is selected right now. All I'm going to do is select the front also. So now I'm holding down Control, and I'm going to select the front as well. Remember, the back was already selected. So if you deselected the back, go ahead and reselect it. And we'll move this over. Zoom in. Remember, I'm working on the side with the green there. My computer's getting a little bit slow. When you get this stack structure, because of the mesh smooth on top, the computer's going to start slowing down. Okay. Oh, actually, I did not want to go over there. I wanted to go to Edit here under Unwrap. All right. So there's the two parts of the legs. There's a couple tools here that can help you maneuver around that we haven't talked about. If I select just the vertices here and I hit this little plus button, it will expand out and grab the vertices of that selection. That makes it really easy to grab a hold of a piece and then move it around so that I don't have to go digging around in these vertices where they overlap. So that's the little plus button. It works the same with the minus button. Also, if I go to edge mode, I can select an edge and I can see the corresponding edge that it matches to. So I'm in edge mode now. This is vertice mode, edge mode, polygon mode. I'm in edge mode. And wherever I select an edge, this other side will turn blue wherever it matches up. And that's important because we wouldn't really know what side this is supposed to be on. So you can tell what side it's supposed to be on. Let's say we had lined it up over here. Then I could select an edge and I can see that this edge matches up here. So, and because they're there, the back and the front, that should work. So if I select this edge here, this edge should match up to it. So that's what we want to see. Now, I need to remember this is a front and a back. At this point I've forgotten which one's the front and which one's the back. I think this is the front and this is the back. It really won't matter for our mapping needs. I need to seam these together because they wrap around. I can't leave them separate like this or I'm going to have problems matching these seams up. Now Max gives you some options for that. I could just go to vertices and I could just weld these together. But then I'd be stretching this polygon where all the other polygons stay the same. So that's not really what I want to do. Remember, stretched polygons, stretched vertices mean that your map is going to get distorted. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to scoop this up so you can see it. I'm going to go down here under Options, and I'm going to, no, actually I didn't need to go under Options. It's right here. I have Soft Selection. I'm going to turn Soft Selection on. Now, from working on this model in the past, I'm going to knock the fall off down to 20 to start with. And it's going to be different with every model. And what I'm going to do is run a little test here. I'm going to grab this vertice, and I'm going to bump the fall off up at 20 increments. Try 60. And you'll see that these vertices are starting to turn blue around it. That's what we want to happen. I'm going to go back to 20. What we really want to do is we're going to grab two vertices here. Oops, moved it. By the way, if you want to undo anything, it's the same undo that you're used to. I'm going to grab two vertices here, and you'll see the soft selection. We want to see that expanding out. There's those blue vertices. And I'm going to use scale. I'm going to lock the scale to the horizontal in this case, and I'm going to seam these together. Can you see that these here, these vertices are moving with it just a little bit? And what that's doing is it's scaling these things together. I can use scale in all directions the same way, and you'll see that it scales together. Now, in some cases, like this one, I'm going to knock the fall off down to 20 because I really don't want it affecting it that much. And we'll grab these guys. And you can see how it's just going to kind of seam those together. And the nice thing about this is then it will stretch the polygons equally. And in some cases where they're far apart, you want the range to be more because you're covering a bigger area. So this one, oops, I got too many there. Oh, there's my fall off. Okay. I'm going to stretch these together. You can see that knee area is stretching together a little bit as well. And you don't have to get them right on each other right now. You can see that we'll seam these together. See, this area is kind of pulling together a little bit. I'm going to undo that, and I'm going to go back down to 20. That's why I like to use increments of 20, is because sometimes you can end up with areas like this that are pulling together a little too much, because they're really tight. Yeah, that's a little bit more like what we want. And we'll seam those together. You can see how they're all going to match up here. And now when we get down to the ankles, what we're going to really need to do is we're going to need to kind of pull all these together. And we're just going to, actually we can grab all of these. We're just going to pull them together a little bit. We don't need to a lot. Again, we're really distorting that area when we do that, so we don't want to do too much with it. But what I'm going to do is just grab these here. I'm going to pull them in a little bit. And I'm just going to be real careful. It's just like fabric or material. We don't want anything to rip. So you got to be kind of gentle with it and just nudge those vertices over. And that will keep the spacing close to what it originally was, which is of course what we're after here. Grab these guys. Actually, those can stay. And now I'm going to go back in here and seam all these together and just tighten them up now that I'm pretty happy with my fall off setting of 10 is keeping these from interfering with each other. This one right here, I'm going to turn fall off just for a second seam these guys together. I'm going to move them up a little bit because those have been moving down slowly as I've been working on them. That'll probably be a little bit better. Turn soft selection back on now. And your model, of course, is going to be different. So you just don't want to stretch those vertices. You want to keep as much of the scale and the distance between the vertices intact. You can see we're running into a little bit of problem with soft selection here. I'm going to turn that off just because it's really tight in here. I need to move this down a little bit. I'm going to have the same problem here with this one. Once I get through these knees, I'll turn soft selection back on. There we go. And if they're seamed together, when you paint over this will be like a template or a coloring book for you when it's all done. You'll be able to just paint in the leg. You've got the template right here in front of you. So there we go. Got one more here to do. Okay. And everything is pretty much still intact here. There we go. Now I'm going to turn soft selection off, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to move a few of these vertices in and out so that I can get some spacing between them that matches about what I started with down here in the ankle. And if that doesn't make any sense, all you're really doing is you're just spacing these polygons apart so that when you put in your texture, it does not get stretched. And I know from building my model that those polygons are about all the same size, so there's no harm here. Grab that guy in pulling them together. And especially watch these side areas, because remember, this part is actually wrapping around the model, and since we normal mapped it, it really didn't take that spacing into account. You can see that the polygons over here are smaller than these in here, which is not the case in the model, so we are going to scale them in and make it work a little bit better. Don't forget the top guys as well. So there we go. These guys can be spread apart a little bit. And that actually looks like it will map pretty well. I'm not happy with this one down here. This guy's not behaving. There we go. And this one, this line here is not fitting well. There we go. Move this one over as well. And of course your model will be different. So now I really don't have any way of knowing how this is mapped right now because there's no texture on it. This looks okay, but we just don't know. There's a couple other, we're going to put a texture on that in a second, by the way, to check it. In fact, why don't we jump over and do that now? That would make more sense. I'm going to close this, go over to my material editor. In my material editor, I've actually already made a shader. It's called a checker template. You've probably heard of these before. There's nothing different about this shader. If I go back up to the top, you'll see that the checker template is just put in the diffuse color. Here's what the checker template looks like. It's just checkers, and it's got a different coloring so that I can see how things are actually laying on the model. The trick of this is if your checkers or your little black squares are remaining consistent and they don't stretch on the model, then you know your UV mapping is pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and put these over and drag it over here. And you'll see that those checkers here look really pretty consistent. So that means I've done a pretty good job of texture mapping that model. You can see that they don't really pinch together, although they do down here. There looks to be some issues down there in the leg. We're going to need to solve that. Looks like a seam that's not working. That might be the outside seam. That actually is probably okay. If the inside seam is okay, let's check that, then we're okay. Yeah, and the inside seam is okay. What that is that's the outside seam So the checker pattern here is falling apart a little bit down here. That's because it's the outside seam, and this side does not match up with this side. So that's perfectly fine. And you can see that the top part of my model is all badly mapped because I haven't UV mapped that. So we're going to move on. I'm going to close this. Also, make sure Show Map and Viewport is checked, or you're not going to be able to see it. It won't do you much good. Okay, I'm going to move on to the top part of my model here. And again, I'm going to just select, I think I'm in the front here. I'm going to select the front piece. Grab all these pieces down here. There we go. Okay, I think that's all of the front part. Now the front part here is pretty flat, so I might as well just use planar mapping for this. Remember, before we went over to mapping and dropped this down, I'm just going to use planar mapping. Here's the hip part. Now, you can use planar mapping, or we could go to normal mapping. Maybe that'll give me a better result. I'm going to use, I'll try back front this time. No, back front's not going to work because I didn't build my model on the front and the back, I guess. Let's use left-right. That might work a little bit better. I think left-right actually gives me a little bit better fit here. And you can see what I'm looking at. I'm going to scale this down a little bit. What I'm looking at is this piece here fits right about in here. See that little piece right there? That's that piece right there. And it's a little bit more true to the model. So I'm going to go ahead and use this. I'm moving that hip piece, scaling it down so that I can match the scale of those little squares. And you'll see here in a second, I'm going to click off, and then you'll see that those squares are going to match the same scale as the other squares. So we're trying to make sure that the scaling is the same between all those squares. I'm going to rotate the model around now and select those same faces that connect to the back, and then I will remap the back faces as well. Now we've got everything selected, and you can see there I've got a little polygon that was already mapped. That's perfectly fine. I'm going to normal map these, and it's going to go eventually here to left and right, which is what I used before, and that will work. And now you can see I've got some extra polygons there. That's that crotch area I was having trouble with. You can see the outline here. That side piece, there's a little indentation there in the side. You can see in the side piece of my model. So I'm scaling this down now to match those squares so that all the squares on the model are as close to the same size as possible. This ensures that the scaling is correct. And now I'm selecting the front polygons that were already mapped, and I am going to now seam these up here in the map. And the trick here is figuring out what side you want to seam them onto. And I'm going to move these up here in a second. And I'm going to make sure that the side of the body, where that little chip piece is, or that little indentation, that's where I'm going to seam them up. I'm moving it around now to decide where I want to seam it up. But the center seam there that I'm going over is right where the crotch of the model is. And that's not where I want to seam them up. It might seem like that, but I want to seam them up on the outside, not on the inside, because I have a symmetry modifier. What I'm doing now is I've selected that little piece that was giving me problems in my UV editor, and I'm trying to figure out what it is. And it's a piece that attaches to the butt between the legs. I'm going to re-planar map that, scale it down, and just kind of move it somewhere close to where I need it to be, which is going to be right down there between the legs. And I know it goes in there somewhere, but I don't know where it goes yet, so I'm just going to leave it there for the time being. Now, I'm going to seam these pieces up here in a second, the same way that we have done before. And I'm trying to figure out what scale they need to be at. So I'm scaling them up. Scaling them up actually makes the boxes smaller because you have more pixels smashed into a bigger area. So that's going to actually make the boxes get smaller. And I'm stretching out some of the vertices now because I want to make sure all the vertices are flat and nicely spaced. That'll make sure that my bitmap doesn't get stretched. I've got a little bit of interior polygon problem here, so there's a little bit of a mess down below the legs here, and that's what I'm trying to figure out right now. But that looks pretty good. I'm going to turn on soft selections now. I'm going to type in 20 as a base for my seaming, and I'm going to pull these vertices together. And the soft selection doesn't seem to be really working quite good enough yet, so I'm going to change it here in a minute. And maybe not. Okay, never mind. And now I'm seaming it together, and I'm running into problems with too many vertices in the same spot. So I knock the soft selection amount down a little bit more so they don't get too distorted. And I'm just going to seam these together. And now what I'm doing is clicking on the edges. I've changed to edge mode. And I'm trying to figure out which edge matches up with which other edge. So I'm looking for that blue edge, and I'm not seeing it here. Having a little bit of trouble figuring out what connects to what right now. And I can't really figure it out. And that edge goes over there. It's this interior polygon stuff I've got down here in this little crotch area, and it's not quite working. So what I'm eventually going to do here is I'm going to change over to vertice mode, and I'm just going to weld these vertices together. So for the time being, I'm just going to kind of weld these guys together here. Go to vertice mode. I'm going to grab those vertices and weld them together. And that vertice I've just selected. I'm going to weld those two together. That's getting pretty close. I'm going to go back up and now weld all of these completely together so that we have a nice tight seam. There we go. Going back down, tightening up that seam, making sure that it's really tight. I'm going to go under Tools, and I'm going to use Weld Selected, or Target Weld. This is a different tool than we've used before. It works exactly the same as what the Target Weld under Edit Poly works like. I've just selected one of the vertices, and then you just target weld or drag it over to the one you want it to weld to. It's exactly the same thing we were doing before with the scale. It's just a different way of doing it. Sometimes I use this technique, sometimes I use scale. I think the scale is a little bit more fun, but this is probably a little bit quicker with using target weld. Now, I'm going to go down below. Now what I'm doing is I'm spacing these vertices out so that those boxes on my model are as close to perfectly square as possible. And so you'll see me kind of pecking around here, watching my viewport, and making them as square as I possibly can. And you can see the viewport, you'll just see them inching around, but they're getting a little bit more square as I work. There we go. That's pretty good. Okay, so I'm just moving these seams out a little bit, spreading them apart, and watching those squares to make sure the squares are as close to perfectly square as possible. Okay, now I'm still trying to figure out where this piece goes and what's going to work best. I'm trying edges here to see if I can see what edge matches up with what. I can see where the edges match up, but it doesn't really make any sense. And eventually here I'm going to pop out to vertice mode. I'm going to select the vertice and just weld the vertice to the vertice that it corresponds with. And you'll see me try and get this to work. I'm moving it around because now I've figured out the bottom edge goes up in there somewhere. That's getting closer. It's still not matching up. I know though that edge matches up with that blue edge there. I know that red edge matches up with the blue one, but let's try vertices. I'm going to click on a vertice, and you can see that I now figured out that if I click on a vertice, I can just target weld the vertice I've clicked on to the corresponding one right there. And one of those vertices turns blue. I'm going to target weld the red one, the one I selected. I'm going to target weld that to the blue one, which is the corresponding one, just like that. And I'm going to do that all the way across that little piece. And I know that those fit together, even though it doesn't make a lot of sense. I'm kind of just following where the program leads me here. Those two there are going to go together. And now that leaves me one more, and I'm just going to tuck this last one up and under and follow the line that's already there. And there we go. And that's pretty close. It's close enough. And since it's all kind of tucked in under the leg anyways, no one's going to notice if it's got a little bit of problems. So we'll target weld that last guy, and then we'll move that one over. And there we go. Okay. So now the hip piece is almost done. And we're going to move on to the chest piece now. I'm going to take that whole hip piece. The leg is over there on the right, even though you can't see it. So I'm going to move this piece up into the top left corner and close the editor. Now I'm going to move over to the chest area. There we go. And I'm looking at the front of the model right now. So I'm going to select the front, all the polygons in the front of the model. There we go. And I'm seeing if I made sure if I got all of them, but I have. Everything that has not been mapped now has been mapped. And I'm going to go back into edit. I know planar mapping wasn't getting me the results I wanted, so this time I'm just going to normal map that piece. No, I'm not. I'm going to planar map it first. And now I'm going to normal map it because I don't like the results I got with planar map. So the normal map now, you can see that edge. There's a little notch in the edge of my front piece. When I rotate it here, you'll be able to see it. And there we go. You can see that edge there matches up with this edge right here. And the other edge is the center. Now the center has some interior polygons. My cursor's over them right now. And those interior polygons actually are inside the model. They're mistakes. And I know they're mistakes, but you can see if I grab them in polygon mode and move them, they stretch the model. And so what I'm going to do, after I undo that, I'm going to detach them. And that's under Tools and Detach, or Break. Not detach, break. And so now I just broke off a polygon, and that will allow me to remove it without distorting the rest of the mesh. Now the rest of these polygons and vertices, I'm just going to stretch out a little bit and make them, again, I'm dealing with those squares. You can see the squares are a little small, so I need to grab the entire piece and scale it down. Scaling it down will make the texture map bigger. There you go. And now they match up a little bit better. And I'm just going to poke around in that mesh and make sure that the vertices are all evenly spaced to get those squares a little bit more straight. There we go. So I'm going to select the whole mesh now and rotate it around to the back. And we're going to do the same thing to the back. There we go. Get zoomed in there. And now I'll select the polygons on the back side, and I'll do exactly the same thing. I don't need that little hip piece. There we go. I'm going to go to normal mapping because I know planar mapping didn't get me as good a result. So I'm going to go to left-right because that's what I used before. And there we go. As soon as I rotate this around, you're going to see that the same pieces match up. That's actually upside down. That little notch there is that notch there. You can see it's upside down. So I'm going to scale that up a little bit, rotate it. That's actually correct. Now those lines line up. And I'm going to move that over where I can work on it. I'm going to scale it down again. I'm trying to match those squares so they're about right. I'm going to move out the side vertices. When you've got a model that wraps around the side like mine does, organic shape, the sides tend to get distorted. You just want to make sure that the vertices have some spacing around them that matches the mesh. And I know my mesh has pretty evenly spaced polygons, so I'm going to do the same thing here in the map. And now I'm going to rotate this around and grab the front. There we go. And now I need to just get rid of those pieces there. They're extra pieces. Those are those interior polygons. I really don't need those right now. And I just need to figure out what seams to what. Now, I'm trying to figure out what edge matches up to which other edge. You can see that that edge matches that edge. The red goes to blue. And that makes sense since that's the outside edge of my model. The inside edge, the one I'm clicking on now, isn't going to match up to anything because I've got symmetry on it. You don't want to match up the inside edges of your model like that. You don't want to do that. That's going to be really hard to texture map. What you want to do is you want to move what's now the red piece over to the left side, over there, and then we're going to have to deal with some distorted seams. You can see there's a real big hole there that's got to be patched up. And I'm going to do the same thing with this that I did with the legs. If you remember, the legs had kind of some big gaps in them too. I'm having trouble selecting the mesh there. There we go. And I'm going to fill in that hole. The hole is actually the side of the model. That area I'm pointing to now is the left and the right sides. So right there, that's actually the middle of my mesh. And if you're not sure, you can always select the edges and see what they match up to. So now I'm going to turn soft selection on. I'm going to type in 20 as my amount, and I'm going to scale that down. And just like we did with the legs, you'll see everything will distort. Well, it won't until I change it to 40. Now it will. It'll distort, which keeps everything nice and neat. We like it when we see that distortion moving across evenly. That will keep those boxes staying square. I need to drop this down to 20. And probably even more than 20 here. Let's see if that works. Yeah, sort of. Those vertices are kind of close together, so they're getting a little distorted. But I'm going to seam these together here, and we're just going to keep moving them closer and closer. You can see the sides are getting a little distorted. That's okay. We can always fix it. There we go. Seam that down, and this last piece needs to go up. The soft selection amount's still a little high at 20, so I'm going to knock that down to 10, and now everything will seam together pretty well. I'm going to move that vertice down, again trying to keep the spacing even. Still seaming some parts up. There's a little gap there that was left. There we go. And now I've matched everything up there. So again, those little squares are as square as possible. You can actually see some distortions down there in the butt area that I didn't catch earlier. Those aren't very good, but I would need to fix those. But I'm going to grab some of these vertices up here in the chest area, and you'll see the corresponding checkered areas slightly moving around. And what I'm trying to do is I'm just trying to square everything off. You can always just visually go by the squares. And as I rotate around here, you're going to see some distortion in the back. where some squares are really big and some squares are small. And the culprit is actually the vertice I'm getting to right now. It's way off, so it needs to be moved over, just like that. There we go. Turn soft selection off. I don't really need it for this. And you'll see those squares start to even out a little bit more. I moved that over a little too much. But you can see how it matches up to the mesh structure. So this vertice needs to be closer to the edge. This vertice needs to come in. That's going to actually make those squares a little better. The culprit here looks like it's this guy. This little vertice needs to come in. And you can see those squares starting to get more space. This vertice needs to come in more, and we're getting more space with the vertices. So that's pretty much how we would always go about these. These polygons up here, I don't need. They're actually interior polygons. They're a mistake. I should have taken them out before doing this. So I'm just going to move them off the screen. And I'm just poking around the model now, looking to see if anything really needs to be fixed. I'm going to move this piece down to the bottom because the legs are over to the right and the hip was up in the top left. So I don't want them overlapping. Eventually there's going to be a texture map. Now I'm looking over the model one last time. You can see down there in the butt area there's some really distorted polygons. I think I'm going to spin it around here in a second. But overall, the checkers are all very even. And that's what we want. If they're even, that means that our texture map won't stretch. You can see there in the side, right in the butt area, there's some really distorted polygons. I didn't catch those when I did the hip. And I would need to go back in and fix those. Those are a little too distorted. Everything else is pretty good. It's a pretty evenly distributed texture map that I got there. So that's about it for our UV mapping, and hopefully this helps. Go ahead and look at it again if you need to, and we'll continue doing the model later.